ncIMPACT is made possible by funding from Civic Federal Credit Union and is a public media North Carolina production in association with the University of North Carolina School of Government.
Leaders from across the state, people just like you, are working to make things better. The question is, could you do this in your community as well? I'm Anita Brown-Graham. This is ncIMPACT. Hello, I'm Anita Brown-Graham, and I'm standing here in Cullowhee on the beautiful campus of Western Carolina University, where we're holding a town hall focused on this region's booming economic recreation industry. You'll hear from panelists who will talk about the increased tourism and the new jobs being created. They'll also talk about the importance of taking steps to maintain the environment without which this industry cannot survive. We'll take some questions from the audience, and now let's see who's making an impact in this region. Well, thank you all for joining us today for this really important town hall meeting. I can't tell you how excited we are to have you with us, to be able to have this conversation with these leaders in the region, both those sitting here on stage and those of you in the audience. Of course, the outdoor recreational industry is one that has brought great boom to this entire region, with jobs and people apparently popping up almost every day. This is all good news. But as is true of all things, there are also some challenges associated with this. Let's take a look at some of the good stuff and talk about some of the challenges.
I graduated from Western Carolina in 2004 with a degree in hospitality and tourism. I've always been an avid outdoorsman. When we first opened up here in Franklin, there was a void to really just have an outdoor store that really supplied people with hard goods and clothing, any type of item that might be needed for outdoor recreation. The people that come through our doors, if we take the Appalachian Trail hikers, for instance, we have seen time and time again where hikers have come and they've actually purchased a home here, vacation with their families here. So obviously, immediately we get an impact of people coming to spend money in our town, but it's the ripple effect that we really see as beneficial, because we see people invest and they fall in love with what we have here, and it's a lasting effect.
About $1.64 billion annually is spent on outdoor recreation just in this area. I think this region is finally realizing that the opportunity is so great, it's worth our time and effort to really foster and promote outdoor recreation, not only as a sustainable portion of our economy, but also for a career path, for people who want to get out and work in that particular industry in whatever manner that might be.
People underestimate the size and scale of the industry and how much it contributes economically to the state of North Carolina. For hundreds of years, Western North Carolina was the playground for the Southeast, at least, and now it's really a national and international destination.
If you look at where we're located, we're within just a couple of hours of some of the major metropolitan areas in the Southeast, being Charlotte, Atlanta. So it presents a great opportunity for people who want to get into this area, see what we've got to offer, spend some time here, and then get back to wherever they're from in a relatively short amount of time.
Everything is here. We don't have to build anything. All we have to do is try to figure out a game plan on how to capitalize on that, obviously responsibly, but be able to look at it and say, how do we utilize the resources that we have here to make the most economic impact and the most sense for Western North Carolina, and doing it in a responsible manner. The people that want to be on the front lines and they want to have that impact in their community, that's what we look at. We look at it as we're not just a retail operation. We're here to impact our community. We're here to make our community better. So we have an opportunity to really influence our community in a really positive way, which is really exciting for us.
Arthur, let's start with you, if I might first welcome to this panel There are people across North Carolina who might think, what's the big deal? Hasn't Western North Carolina always had an outdoor recreation industry? Help us understand why this moment is different. What's so big about this big deal? And how big is it actually?
That's a great question, and thank you, Anita. So the outdoor recreation industry generates $28 billion a year in North Carolina and creates 260,000 jobs. And so people don't realize how important that is to the state's economy. It's bigger than financial services and the pharmaceutical industry. And I think, you know, while this, people have been coming here for 200 years for wellness and health and the air and the water, recently, I'd say in the last 5-10 years that I've been in Western North Carolina, I've just noticed that people are seeking authentic experiences. They want adventure, and what better place than to come to Western North Carolina, where we have the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, where they can experience cultural and historical experiences like the Qualla Boundary and the Eastern Band of the Cherokee Indians, and then Nantahala Outdoor Center with paddle sports. And so we could go on, but I think the synergy between outdoor recreation and craft beverage and craft food that you find in all of the towns in Western North Carolina, in Sylva, in Bryson City, in Waynesville, just to name a few, Franklin, I think all of that's important. And working for Western Carolina University, we've intentionally tried to promote small businesses and the economy of Western North Carolina, and outdoor recreation is a big piece of that.
Terrific. So I'm curious, Corey, Sarah, last decade, is that when you've seen this big explosion in this industry sector?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, one thing that we noticed opening up in fall 2010 is we saw that obviously the economy was not necessarily the best. In Macon County, you know, we were close to 15% unemployment. And so we look at that and how that relates to outdoor recreation. Obviously, there's less expendable income. And so one thing that we were immediately getting feedback was we saw people were doing more, obviously, local and regional trips because they didn't have expendable income to go on maybe vacations that they thought they would have. And, you know, the beauty of outdoor recreation is, you know, we've got so much Forest Service land in each of these counties. So it's just a great resource. And so, you know, with that being said, we've seen every year it's just been compounded. What started off probably as an option for people has now become a lifestyle.
You know, Corey, you may be the first person I have ever met who found the silver lining in the 2008 recession. Give us a little sense of your story.
Sure.
You're an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurship is huge in this region. How did you get into it, and what are you doing?
Yeah. So I'm born and raised in Macon County, and you know, I was fortunate to have a dad that really saw the outdoors as an area that he and I could connect. So we spent a lot of time in the woods, being able to, you know, spend time together. And you know, as I've grown older, I've seen that it's just a great opportunity for people to be able to experience the same thing that I'm passionate about, which is really where Outdoor 76 stemmed from. And you know, when we started putting together our business plan, we looked at it as what type of opportunity we had to really try to capture on a market that we felt like it was tapped, but it wasn't really in the capacity that we thought it could be. If you look within a 2-hour radius of Western North Carolina, or Franklin in particular, we've got close to 12 million people that could drive 2 hours and get to our location. And so what does that mean from an economic standpoint? It means that there's a lot of people in metropolitan areas that have expendable income that would love to come and play in our backyard. And so that was a big deal for us to be able to recognize that, and then also come up with a game plan and formulate on how do we capitalize on that.
Sarah, what kind of supports are in place for entrepreneurs like Corey who've got a great idea and see a market they want to capitalize on?
I think local governments and economic developers in the region have really recognized that entrepreneurs are the backbone of our economy, and there's been a real shift in focus towards small business development, small business support. We have our Mountain West partnership here in the 7 western counties that is very focused on promoting the region for small business and entrepreneurial support. There's loan programs that we're connected to. There's educational programs through the community colleges in Western, and really just trying to align all the resources that exist in the region and get them in front of the entrepreneurs that have visions like Corey.
And of course, these entrepreneurs are creating multiple ripple effects in communities. Let me stay with you for a second, Sarah, and just ask you to talk about innovative strategies that you see communities undertaking to really take full advantage of this outdoor recreation industry.
I think the small towns in our region have really gotten on board with downtown revitalization and recognize that the downtowns are the heart of the community. I've heard them called the living room of your community. You want to have a place where your residents can go and hang out and build community. And that is amazing for entrepreneurs. There's a lot of opportunity there. Outdoor recreation is a lifestyle sector. People want a nice community where they can see live music, visit a microbrewery, eat local foods, go to the farmer's market, and our downtowns are places where that's really happening.
Say a little bit, if you will, Arthur, about the kind of support that Western Carolina is offering to entrepreneurs and others. Let's talk more broadly about workforce development, if we might.
Right. So we're really active in partnering, for example, with Southwestern Community College. Paul Wolf, who runs the outdoor leadership program there. A lot of those students come to Western, finish up their degrees. So we are interested in creating that talent pipeline for the workforce for outdoor recreation in our region and nationally. We also support students developing businesses while they're a student. We have trade shows that encourage that. We have pitch events to encourage entrepreneurship where we get the community involved as a judge. And so we're trying to train and create that ecosystem so that it's valuable and can have that ripple effect, like you said, to our regional outdoor economy.
So could you help the audience understand just in a little bit more detail, when we talk about training for the outdoor economy, what particular skills or jobs do we have in mind?
So there's obviously starting your own business. So Corey didn't mention, but he's a Western grad, and he went out and started a really cool outfit or retail. I think you have craft beverage in there too, and he's expanding. Justin Paget, who's in the audience, he started Landmark Learning, which is the premier outdoor education organization for, recognized nationally. And we also have students that go into leadership positions at the Nantahala Outdoor Center. And so I probably could go on, but we're really partnering with the region's organizations, both for-profit and nonprofit, and trying to listen to them and see what they need in terms of skills like leadership and communication and, getting our students to network and value the so-called soft skills that will help them not only in this economy, but really any industry.
I want to stick with this notion of collaboration for a second, because clearly this kind of work doesn't happen without lots of people coming together, sometimes across differences, to make it work. Let's talk about the policy environment. What are things that the state or your local governments could do to further catalyze this industry sector?
I can't have this conversation or almost any conversation about growing our economy right now without bringing up the need for high-speed broadband. It's a huge need in rural Western North Carolina, all parts of rural North Carolina, and rural United States as a whole. I think we've made great strides working as local rural communities to beat that drum and to work on it as much as we can, but there are policy changes that could be made that would incentivize that last mile broadband that we need. We all have really decent internet at our homes. Thankful that we do, as a rural region, have a strong middle mile network, but the last mile to the home, it's going to be very difficult to grow this sector and to attract the types of folks that want to work here and live in a beautiful place like this if they don't have good internet at home.
Thank you. Other thoughts? I saw you both nodding your head, so I presume you totally agree. More broadband capacity, but what else?
I think that one thing that that has been mentioned in passing as well is housing for individuals. And I think that that's something that a lot of communities struggle with. And I think that it's going to be a bigger need, obviously, as each of our communities grow and as the outdoor rec market gets bigger. There's more people that want to be a part of the communities. And obviously that's a challenge. That's not something that is immediately put in place. It takes planning, takes logistics. And so it's a challenge that clearly every community in Western North Carolina is really faced with. So I'm
going to come back and talk about that in a second, but Arthur, I think you wanted to jump in.
Well, I think, last fall we were partner on a grant, a $1.5 million grant from the Appalachian Regional Commission. We partnered with the Southwestern Commission. Mountain BizWorks in Asheville was the lead agency. So those federal, or state opportunities for funding so that we could partner different organizations to support the economy, that's incredibly important as well.
Got it. So let's go back to this point that Corey alluded to, which is lots of people are moving into this region, and that's a good thing. Some of them who are moving in for a matter of days and weeks. They're your tourists. Others are moving in for some part of the year. They're your second homeowners. I'd like each of you to talk a little bit about how you balance the interest of permanent local residents against these newcomers who are certainly bringing resources and increasing the tax base and all the things that you appreciate, but come with their own sets of challenges. Who wants to go first?
I'll start. I think a big part of the work around outdoor recreation is trying to leverage that interest in the region into a year-round economy. So we're taking, people come here because it's a beautiful place and they want to spend time here. But tourism jobs are seasonal and they tend to be lower paying. So how can we leverage that into more of a year-round economy where we can create jobs for folks that already live here or entrepreneurial opportunities for people that grew up here rather than just enjoy the seasonal economy and then suffer through winter.
And so what are some of the ideas on the table to do just that?
Well, I think, again, it's creating the types of communities that not only attract those people, but that can support those people. And that's Community Development 101. That's having good housing opportunities. That's having good transportation, water and sewer infrastructure. That's just the basic, making sure our communities can support the populations that we have that are growing.
Corey, how do you see the tension and how is it being balanced?
Well, it's always an interesting conversation being a native of Macon County, and clearly we get a lot of Atlanta, Georgia traffic. We get a lot of Florida traffic. And, the biggest struggle that I think locally that anybody would say is finding that balance of development and progressiveness in communities without losing the sense of heritage and culture that make each small town unique. There's a reason that people are interested in coming to our small towns and communities in Western North Carolina. And obviously, you have to be very sensitive to understanding that you don't want to lose that character, because that's what makes each of our place that we call home unique. But in the same sense, we have to have a willingness to be able to work and understand that we're working towards a bigger goal. We don't want to stay complacent in the size of our community. We don't want to stay complacent in our workforce development. We want to progress, but we have to do it once again in a responsible manner.
So Arthur, your title is Executive Director of Community and Economic Development and Innovation.
Correct.
What are the innovations that help to balance these tensions?
So I think that in terms of Western, the innovation and new products and new designs, and we're not as focused in transportation infrastructure and some of those resources that we need, but I think what I love about outdoor recreation community is that everybody's connected, everybody knows each other. It's a great industry to participate in. And I think collectively, now we have the data and we have the Outdoor Industry Association numbers and facts, so we can sort of, we have common language that we can talk to the legislature about or leaders about. And I think that's why you're seeing a lot of movement in the last 5 or 10 years with the outdoor economy in Western North Carolina.
I love the idea that you point out, to Sarah and Corey's point, that this industry sector is also building a sense of community, right, not necessarily in the geographic sense, but across geographies. Which brings me to this point, because Western North Carolina is vast. I think I realized that before this visit, but this visit has certainly honed that home for me. So which counties, Sarah, are we talking about today as we talk about the outdoor recreation industry?
Which counties?
Which counties?
Haywood.
Because they're your counties.
They are my counties. Everything west of Buncombe, where Asheville is. So we have Haywood, Jackson, Swain, Macon, Clay, Cherokee, and Graham counties. Some of the, I think people recognize town names. We're sitting in Cullowhee right now, which is an unincorporated community where Western Carolina University is. We're down the road from Silva, 7 miles from the university. Bryson City is right at the front door to the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Franklin has the Appalachian Trail going through it. Out in Murphy and Hayesville, we have beautiful Lake Chatuge, Lake Santilla out by Robbinsville. So we live in paradise out here, and I think everyone across the country knows about Asheville now. But and to our benefit, I think that's had, that benefits this region. But all of our small towns are rich in culture. You can walk down the street and meet people whose families go back generations here, and they are used to living in paradise. I think we're just now starting to make a little more noise about the outdoor industry, but it's always been a part of the community out here.
Well, I have to say, vast as it may be, I am insanely jealous that you get to call this your backyard every day. Yeah. We're talking to people all across North Carolina. What do you want them to know about this region that I haven't asked you yet?
Well, I think I want people to know that the folks in Western North Carolina, we're not looking for your help or your handout or whatever. There are a lot of smart people here. There's a great university here. There's a great community college system, great councils of government. And so we're very much working on our issues. We want the rest of the state to realize that, and we also want them to come out here and participate and see how beautiful this area is. It's a treasure, and people realize that. But we're working on creating an awesome industry that is going to create jobs and economic development out here in the West. And I think we have a lot of things to share with the rest of the state. We have a huge Outdoor Economy Conference, October 10th of next fall. We'd invite the whole state to come to that. It'd be a great place to showcase what the region is doing in terms of outdoor recreation, gear design, and manufacturing.
And out here in our 7 counties, we do have an abundance of resources to help with business development, with funding, with planning. We are resource rich.
So are you inviting people to bring your ideas and
start
a business in Western North Carolina?
Yeah, we will help you find a building, and we will support you.
All right, we've got bring your money, bring your ideas. What do you want from the rest of North Carolina, Corey?
I think that the big thing is just, that I take away from it, it's just people understanding the passion and just the sense of pride that people have here in Western North Carolina. It's a special place. I've been fortunate to travel a lot, and I'm proud to call these mountains home. And we're better equipped now than we ever have been from an economic development standpoint. We clearly have great resources in place to be able to help people, whether they're relocating or starting a business or a second homeowner, whatever it might be. I think that people would be pleasantly surprised to see how hospitable and how wonderful this place is.
and you expect them to come with that too. So they should
Absolutely.
bring their humility and good manners when they come.
Absolutely.
Sounds perfectly reasonable to me. I want to thank you all for sharing just the great insights about this outdoor recreation industry. Many of us come to this region of the state and we enjoy it, but we don't fully understand what goes into making it happen. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. At this point, we're now going to turn to audience questions. We've got.
I realize that you want to talk about all of the good things. Having lived here a few years, I can tell you there are some other problems I'd like to see you address a little bit if you can. There's the traffic. There are the water and sewer concerns of some of our small communities who don't have sufficient water and sewer. There are school and education concerns. And I know this is not the focus, but if you don't have those things addressed, it's very hard to have a good outdoor recreation industry. So if you could speak to those.
Thank you for that great question. And I think, Sarah, you were intimating this when you talked about Community Development 101 and making sure the basics were in place. So I think I'll just point that question to you if I might.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that the reason local government works on economic development is to grow the tax base. And when we grow our tax base, we have more resources to build infrastructure. We are rural Appalachia, and we have been supported by federal subsidies for decades to build transportation, water and sewer, and schools in a lot of instances, because a large percentage of our land is held by the federal government and isn't taxable. So I understand your dismay, and it's shared by a lot of people who work very hard every day to create more opportunities for these rural communities so that they can afford the nice things like good roads and good infrastructure. But we're trying to grow our economy for that reason.
Either of you want to add anything before we go to the next question?
So back in February, we had a gear design and manufacturing summit where we invited about 30 businesses to come to campus, meet with our College of Engineering and Technology, tour our Rapid Center, which is a center for R&D and prototyping. And we also had a hackathon as part of that. And these businesses gave us product design flaws, issues, that the students had 2 days to solve those problems. And so I think 150 students were involved, and the winning 5 teams were able to present at the summit in front of this crowd of economic developers and businesses. And so the university is very intentional about building the relationship not only in retail and parks and rec and things that are incredibly important, but also the manufacturing piece, because we know that manufacturing does have a high multiple. The salaries are really competitive. And so, yeah, that's an important focus for us, and we're really being intentional about that to support kind of all aspects of the outdoor economy.
Interesting. All right, well, it looks like we are running out of time. I do want to thank you all for participating on this panel and recognize explicitly the tension between continuing to try to grow your economic base and making investments that support longtime residents. To Corey's point, housing is probably where you see this show up the soonest, but it is not the only place where the tension exists. Thank you for being open about that and sharing that with the rest of the state of North Carolina. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As Western North Carolina continues its economic boom around the outdoor recreational industry, it will also need to find ways to manage its environmental resources, the natural resources that are, in fact, at the very base of this industry sector. Without doing so, the industry sector will not last very long.
I started mountain biking in 1993, and Western North Carolina is where I got my feet wet. I think the things that I really enjoyed about it is that mountain biking in particular, gets you away from the noise and the hustle and bustle, and you deal with day to day, and just kind of gives you a space to be out in a beautiful area, but also to challenge yourself. The natural trail features we have in the national forest, rocks and roots, wet conditions a lot of the time. All of those make the sport really interesting and really challenging. A lot of people come from all over the country and all over the world to hike and bike on these trails. If we can't figure out a way to manage these trails and preserve the natural resources we have here, that it's going to affect not only people's personal appreciation and enjoyment for these amazing resources we have, but it will also potentially have an effect on an economic impact on our area as well.
There are places in North Carolina that are being loved to death. They're being overutilized and or under-maintained for the amount that they're being used. So one of the things we discuss often is how do we spread that out? Because we also have places that are being underutilized. They're magic and they're wonderful, but they might not be well marked. So we work a lot with our partners in the environmental community to really discuss that balance, and not just in a philosophical way, but in a way that uses science and works with volunteers to see what work needs to be done where to keep this place beautiful, because its beauty is the driving force of the outdoor recreation industry.
Those recreational assets are the very foundational infrastructure for this industry, and so I think it makes a really strong argument to take care of these places. And if your wallet depends on, and your family's income depends on the places around you being kept healthy and clean, right? And if you are getting your health through being outside, you have a real incentive to take care of those places, I think, both monetarily and just through your time.
I think there's a lot of room for improvement for all of us, Industry 9 and other companies in the area, to try to figure out ways that we can work effectively with, whether it's the Forest Service or other private resources, to figure out how we can take better care of the natural resources we have in the area. I think it's critical that we as an industry, collectively, the outdoor industry, figure out a way that we can give back to these trails that have given us this amazing resource that's helped us grow our businesses.
Barry, Lisa, Jeremy, thank you so much for being with us to talk a little bit about balancing environmental stewardship with economic growth. I want to start with you, Jeremy, if I might. In our focus groups across the region, we heard several people talk about the importance of forest and trails and water, and made clear that these represent important infrastructures for this region. Indeed, people said it was important to invest in them in the way that one might invest in roads, bridges, water and sewer systems. Can you talk a little bit about the complex collaborative process in place to ensure these investments are made?
I can definitely do that. Being a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians and working for the Eastern Band, being a federally recognized tribe, we have limitless, we've experienced limitless exercises in creating those partnerships with federal, state, county, intertribal, those types of relationships. We realize something, that in doing so, in those partnerships that we have, in doing so, we understand that those relationships have to be fluid. There has to be a confluence of ideas and resources. We've realized that, and to continue to bolster those types of things, communication is obviously key with everyone, and you have to be upfront with everything. And one of the perfect examples that I have in terms of some of the partnerships that we have had with Jackson County, for one, when building infrastructure an infrastructure project with Jackson County's schools for Smoky Mountain Elementary. The tribe partnered with Jackson County to fund that project, and we have benefit from it, the tribe has benefit from it, and the schools have benefit from it.
And what is the project?
The project is water to the Smoky Mountain Elementary School. We are giving clean, good water. It can also provide proper fire protection. But then again, too, we have another customer, and then also down that line, down that 441 corridor, we don't have to waste water. Those types of relationships, that's just an example, those types of relationships are very important for us to make sure that we can, those things can be carried over into a recreational idea with the properties that we purchased at Black Rock and in Shut-In Creek. There's no reason why we can't partner with, in terms of that, to create a recreational opportunity for the region itself. You never know when you get everybody down in the, bring everybody to the planning table, you never know where you can go.
Isn't that the truth?
That's true.
Always.
Absolutely.
So, Barry, I used to think that love it to death was a tagline from really bad movies. You know, the kind that come on at 2 o'clock in the morning and somebody's killing somebody. But in this region, loving it to death takes on its own definition. Lots of conversations about how important it is to steward the natural assets that are at the very base of this economic expansion. Give us some sense of how that's playing itself out.
So yeah, absolutely. So I think we may have coined that loving it to death because of the number of users that visit our national forest. So specifically around, partnerships and our agency is essentially founded on that. We have a long history of partnerships here in the National Forest in North Carolina, specifically the Pisgah and the Nantahala, which we'll be talking about today. And we thrive on those partnerships and that shared stewardship model that we've been talking about with Lisa and Jeremy in the panel prior. But loving it to death does draw some concern to our agency because those impacts from those users, some 7 million users visit the National Forest, the Pisgah and the Nantahala, every single year.
Say that again.
7 million users.
Wow.
That's second to only another national forest that uses skiing to get a higher number. So we're one of the most visited national forests in America. So how we balance through shared stewardship with our partners and volunteers is complex and challenging.
So I want you to talk a little bit about the role of volunteers, because as we think about stewardship, one of the challenges are the limited resources that we might have at our disposal. But apparently there are no limits to the number of volunteers that you have at your disposal.
Absolutely. So yeah, we're our background and our foundation is on partnerships. And specifically the volunteers that also come to this area to retire and use these national forests. We couldn't do it without them, to be honest with you. And so we have partnerships with the Pisgah Conservancy on the Pisgah that essentially rounds up special projects that we outline and focus on. And it's even infrastructure and the critical infrastructure that serves our recreation users. And the Pisgah Conservancy, a nonprofit that's really representing all the user groups from mountain biking, as we saw on the video, to equestrian users that's using our national forest. And on one day and one event, we're seeing as much as 350 volunteers coming to devote their time, effort, and money for protecting our national forest lands. That's impressive. What's also humbling is that on any given day on the Pisgah National Forest, on the Pisgah Ranger District, there's more volunteers working today than there are federal employees serving their job. Pretty impressive and humbling for me to say.
That's remarkable. Lisa, yes. I want your take on this loving it to death phenomenon.
And that's a good question, and I'll take it back to the reservoirs that we have in our area because we have access areas there. And so there's sometimes a perception in the Nantahala area, the Duke Energy service area here, that our reservoirs are overused. arguments could be made one way or the other, but Duke conducts capacity studies to see if our reservoirs can contain and maintain. There is high usage on Memorial Day weekend, and upcoming is the 4th of July, and there's going to be a lot of activity there. And as an example, up on Lake Glenville, they have an annual fireworks display that draws people on the reservoir, on their boats to see it, but also land-based. And so you have a lot of concentration there of people loving it to death, but only for a short period of time. And I would be remiss if I don't make this point with this audience and representing Western North Carolina, that another thing that Duke did in partnership is we developed access points on the mainstream of the Tuckasegee River, which makes it the most accessible river in the southeastern United States. So that's really huge. So people ask, well, what about the use there? To date, we haven't seen overuse of the access points, but it's also limited to a certain degree because they're not very large. So that does a little bit of control of use of those facilities. But one could see it being loved to death. Another thing for our reservoirs in the Nantahala area is that Duke owns generally 10 vertical feet above full pond. And so adjoining property owners have to ask for permission for what they can do on that tract of land. So we do control and steward that section of property that surrounds our reservoirs. So we can control a little bit to a certain degree how much it is loved, but we don't have a lot of control above our, yes.
So I want to move from the focus on the natural assets themselves more broadly to look at public infrastructure. So having 7 million people a year coming to visit the forest, and however many more are coming for kayaking and taking advantage of the opportunities of these reservoirs, has to have some impact on public infrastructure. Can we talk a little bit about what that looks like?
I'll go.
Go.
It has to, in your planning phase, it has to take a central role from the very, very beginning. If you're going to do a project, if you're going to do a capital project, if you're going to build a hotel, if you're going to build anything, you have to make sure you can flush the commodes, somebody's going to take the trash out, and you're going to have fresh water. Those types of things have to be, from the very, very, very beginning, they have to be taken into account. We at the tribe, we've done a lot of capital projects over the years, and we have learned the hard way in many regards, but we're learning nonetheless. For our latest project, our recreation project, Fire Mountain Trails, we had, just another example, we had an exercise that took place. It was a downed rider extraction exercise type of thing. And so what we did was that you've got to think of infrastructure issues as EMS and fire as well. Now during that extraction exercise, it really, really took a lot of resources away, so that you didn't realize it until you were actually there, that all of if one rider's down in the woods, about a mile up in the woods, you have to, if anything else were to happen, all the resources we were using, the reaction times and the response times would have dropped tremendously. Now we're working on that problem. We're working on that solution you've got to look at staffing, you've got to look at you've got to tighten up your mutual aid compacts and covenants. And so it has to be, nonetheless, it has to be thought of at the very beginning.
So I'm hearing EMS, I'm hearing water, I'm hearing workforce, I'm hearing waste. Other implications?
Sure, for us on the National Forest, it is challenging, right? You're looking at facilities that were designed in the 70s, maybe the early 80s, that we're seeing essentially probably 25% of the use that we're seeing now. So if you're looking at the physical infrastructure, it's that shared stewardship concept of really sharing the responsibility with our state agencies and our nonprofits alike. I'd like to name a couple, and we could talk all day about our partnerships here for the National Forest in North Carolina. But specifically,
you know, the fact that you could
that's
talk
right.
all day.
That's right.
I mean, I'm not going to let you talk all day, but I'm glad that you could.
And I could. But specifically, the partnerships around maintaining the infrastructure. Yeah, everyone would love to donate and build a new facility, but getting troops rallied around, if you will, maintaining the infrastructure, as mentioned earlier, is complex and challenging. But with a partnership with a state agency called the North Carolina Wildlife Resource Commission, we have a long history of partnering with managing wildlife and aquatics, but not so much on maintaining infrastructure such as roads. So over the last couple of years, we're excited to say that we're matching our investment into our transportation system, specifically here in Western North Carolina, dollar for dollar in that agency. That's super exciting for the National Forest in North Carolina. Also talking about infrastructure and focusing in partnerships around removing culverts that were actually installed many, many years ago on the road transportation system that oftentimes creates barriers to the aquatic habitat that are going and moving underneath our road system. So we've partnered with Trout Unlimited using citizen science, the volunteers that you talked about earlier that are essentially collecting data and building databases from federal, state, and nonprofit collections of data to really remove culverts and allow aquatics to pass and to really provide that resilient transportation infrastructure that we're seeking in this Western North Carolina region.
It's fantastic. Thoughts, Lisa?
Yeah, sure. So, with that, our infrastructure mainly is that of power lines that are built overhead. So keeping the vegetation managed within that corridor is important because we have to supply reliable, safe power to our customers. I would say sometimes maybe a challenge would be as our region continues to grow for us, doesn't happen very often, but you may have someone that won't allow property owner upstream or beside them or near them right of way to get electricity. But we've been successful in getting those things through and settled. I would say also that we partner with, Jeremy was talking about construction within the Qualla boundary is huge, and we always partner with developers and other individuals as we move through a process to provide support in what we can do to provide the infrastructure that we need to supply the customers.
To our earlier conversation about the volume of people, it's reflected in the challenges to infrastructure, feels inconsistent with all of the chatter around the nature deficit for our younger generations. What specifically are you doing and what are you seeing in terms of young people, children, taking advantage of these resources?
That is kind of a passion of mine, particularly in terms of...
I've given you a softball question.
You certainly have. Well, the Eastern Band, we know one thing. If we want to succeed in any of these outdoor recreation ideas, you have to get families and children involved, and you have to progress them. You have to start them young and get them outdoors and get them loving the outdoors and being responsible for the natural resources. Another thing we face here and on the Qualla boundary is the original impetus rather for Fire Mountain Trails was to get kids active. Obesity rates are incredibly high on the boundary. Diabetes rates are incredibly high on the boundary. What we want to do, the original impetus was to get people moving, give them another opportunity to get outside and do something other than, say, ball sports. We don't have necessarily any solid data to say that it's happening, but I certainly have anecdotal data. You see families on the trails now. You see enrolled members of the Eastern Band with their sons and their daughters, and you see entire families that would never have done this otherwise. It's just been a really phenomenal experience to actually see them on the trail. And that leads into our next step. Our next step is not to create some big, massive jump line on Fire Mountain Trails, but it's to create more of a greenway, what we call a green trail, a easy trail, something for progression. And families can do they can be together. More of that type of stuff. The Eastern Band has been very active in doing that sort of thing. Our Natural Resources Department has, our Fisheries and Wildlife Management has, we have a yearly Talking Leaves trout derby. Brings 2,000 kids and puts them in the water and puts a fishing rod in their hands.
2,000 kids from the Koala Boundary?
No, 2,000 kids from the region.
Okay.
And from this region. And we have so many good partners that are that put so much time and effort, i.e. Nantahala Area Sorba. They have put on bike rodeos. They have contributed to the Jackson County Greenway Kids Bike Trail. They've partnered with us on numerous occasions. We have Swain County Schools and Cherokee Central Schools. They are now, they have bike clubs that are taking kids out, getting them outside. There's just numerous avenues, and it looks like, from my perspective, in terms of getting kids engaged, it looks like our region is doing a fine job of doing that.
So this is so important because you could see that the alternative could be true, where you have all of these families from outside of the region coming in to enjoy these resources, and for people who live here, there's not as much incentive to take advantage of them. So kudos to you all for making that a priority. I want to end where I started, which is on this notion of how heavily collaborative these processes must be. And I'm particularly interested in how you are engaging local residents in the decision making about expanding this industry sector.
I'll take this lead on this one, and we'll use the example, as I've referenced a couple of times, the resources we have, the hydroelectric resources we have here, went through a relicensing process. And Duke chose to make it a stakeholder process where we engage. There's the Tuckasegee Cooperative Stakeholder Team, and there's the Nantahala Cooperative Stakeholder Team. There were 17 members of the Tuckasegee team, 21 members. And with that, you're bringing a lot of people to the table who have different interests, but yet we worked through this. It took over 9,000 people hours to come to settlement agreements for both of these hydroelectric operations that struck a balance between environmental needs, accessibility to our reservoirs, aesthetics, and continued generation with our hydro facilities. And I think that speaks quite highly. That group was consistent of federal and state and local agencies. It represented county and towns in our footprint. It also represented, non-government organizations, homeowners associations. The list goes on. Sort of like at Academy Awards, you don't want to start singling anyone out because if you miss someone, you're a bit on the spot. But the point being, it was a collaborative effort that brought a lot of people together. And the beautiful thing of it is, it came out with an agreement that went from local up to the government, and the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission appreciated that and put it in place. So in essence, these communities developed what we have in place and was supported by that.
That's fabulous. The calibration of the process to get you to outcomes that everybody can buy into, yes. Critically important, yes. In just about every arena, but certainly where you're talking about natural assets that we all feel belong to all of us.
That is correct.
I want to open this up to audience questions, if I may. So.
Hi, I teach here at Western Carolina University in the Parks and Recreation Management program. I wanted to kind of focus on a little bit about the human infrastructure, and it is awesome that we have so many volunteers working in the National Forest, but we also train students to work in the National Forest looking for those federal jobs. So what can we do to make sure that our students are not being pushed out of jobs because volunteers have them? How can we make sure that they're going to have jobs in the future?
I love this question because it makes clear that for every pro, there is a con. Barry, do you have a response?
So sure, absolutely. So of course, that's that's complex and challenging, or you wouldn't be answering that question as a faculty member here with Western Carolina University. And that's something that we strive to balance each and every day. But let me talk specifically about what we are doing to network with the universities and really influx as best that we possibly can students and recent graduates into our agency specifically to secure those federal jobs. We have partnerships with universities all across the country, and specifically we've worked with this university here, and we have members of our staff in the engineering department that are graduates of Western Carolina University. As Arthur and I was talking earlier, you know, when folks ask me about advice about working with the federal government, you know, just immerse yourself in that agency, into that department, and that culture before you know, just kind of jump into it. So we have opportunities here in North Carolina, specifically Franklin, and each of our district ranger offices. So if you would like to connect with me later on, there's numerous opportunities that we can plug your students in park and recreation into the National Forest in North Carolina.
So I guess it would not be appropriate for me to ask for a cut of any student who actually gets a job with the Forest Service. Okay, there are limits to it all. I want to thank you all for engaging in this really rich conversation. And of course, thank you to the audience for being here. It is true that for as much good as is happening because of this boom to this incredible outdoor recreation industry, there are some challenges. There are present-day challenges, and they certainly will be future ones. I'm happy to know that in this region you are working together in such a wonderfully robust way to respond to those challenges. Thanks again. This is ncIMPACT.
I believe that if you don't talk about it, then nobody understands anything. And so I think it's very good that the discussions come up about meeting these challenges. And again, challenges that one person perceives aren't even thought about by somebody else. They're looking at their own challenges. So we have to have discussions about the whole big picture and how we can plan to meet those challenges now and in the future.